Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week starts off a brand new month, which of course means it's time to get right back into our ongoing series on Spawn with Spawn number 27. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1995, we can see here that it's a sort of minimalist cover. However, it is pretty eye-catching, of course, with our hero of the story, as it were, laid out on the ground with a giant hole blasted through his chest and his, psychoplasm blood splattered across the sort of invisible wall behind him. Don't get me wrong, this is a really cool idea to create the illusion of a wall in the ground with Spawn's quote-unquote blood, and it looks neat, but it also is a way of getting yourself out of having to draw a background for the image. And I'm not entirely against it. I think it looks cool overall. My one complaint is that when you have a comic book like this that has the all black gloss cover, it's a magnet for fingerprints. It just, anything you touch, or anytime you touch this with even slightly unwashed hands, you leave smudges all over the cover. And this is something that's going to happen in the comic book store when this is on the shelf, or even in your home, which, by the way, I recommend to anybody who's into comics, before you start messing with your comic books, wash your hands. I do it every time. It's never going to be a bad idea because it gets the oils off of your fingers and helps protect the book in terms of, keeping fingerprints and smudges off of it. Story, Todd McFarlane. Art, Todd McFarlane, Greg Capullo, and a special thanks to Kevin Conrad. Copy, editor, and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. The story begins in a home in Massachusetts where a man is inside of this home, and we see him here kneeling in front of what looks to be a very Catholic-style altar. We also see candles burning in the back, a rosary draped over the table, and a Bible, as well as a bulletin board covered in newspaper clippings about Spawn. The man is deep in prayer, stating that, once again, he's been passed over and that God has bestowed power to someone else whose faith must be greater than his, but he will prove his faith and prove that he is deserving of the power. So we already see that this man, while he seems to be a religious zealot, is also very concerned about gaining rewards for himself as well, and is not necessarily pious in terms of just sheer devotion to God, but he wants to gain something from it. We then see that the man in question starts to remove some ominous-looking military-type hardware from a box as he continues to have a conversation with God, stating, I'll prove that I can be worthy of your empire, and I know you have great plans, but they do confuse me. He then states that he's forced to use the technology of the secular world, and as we see him driving down the highway, he states, I've spent the vast majority of my fortune preparing for your kingdom. Why do you forsake me? Once again, showing that he's very much focused on trying to gain power and gain things for himself in his actions, and that he's not doing it out of devotion, more so he's doing it out of trying to gain for himself. We then see him pull up to a private jet where a man outside of the jet says it's fueled and ready to leave for New York. Mr. Cron, I believe is how you say that. So we now know the man's last name, and as we see the plane flying into New York City, it simply says, "Why have I been cursed?" Then, inside of a cab, he's getting dropped off in the red light district. The cabbie actually tells him to be careful, and the man thanks him for the warning, but he says that he intends to enjoy himself. As he walks through the crowd, he's approached by a homeless man who is drunk and asks him for money, stating that he needs it for more medicine. He's then approached by a prostitute who, of course, offers her services to him for a price. But as he passes them all by, surprisingly, instead of being judgmental and finding them to be wicked, evil sinners, he actually just says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know what they do, not what they do," which, of course, is a biblical quote of Jesus when he was being crucified. And it's surprising that we would see this man be, not so judgmental of all of the people that he considers to be sinners, and instead see them more as lost sheep who just need guidance and not necessarily evil adversaries. It doesn't seem to necessarily fit in with his character as a whole from what we've seen so far. We're then teleported to the alleyways where we come across Spawn holding the lifeless corpse of his friend Bobby. Bobby was actually killed in the pages of Youngblood by Chapel, who then killed himself. I haven't made it to that point in Youngblood yet on my Youngblood series. That happens in issues 8 through 10, as it's shown down here in the bottom corner. I've only made it to issue 3 so far, but if you'd like to know more about Youngblood, you can check out my Youngblood playlist. Spawn is taking the loss of Bobby really hard, as he believes he's failed the men of the alleyway again, and is upset that several people now have died as a result of his inaction. We also remember in the last issue, a man killed himself because he was unable to maintain custody of his daughter, and he wanted Spawn's help, but Spawn basically just told him to go screw off. However, Bootsy tries to console Spawn, stating, you know, man, this isn't your fault. This war was brought to you. You're not looking for trouble. And while Spawn does appreciate Bootsy's words, he also is very much understanding of the fact that his presence in the alleyways is bringing harm's way directly to all of the men that live there. And he's also very upset about the fact that, you know, he wasn't able to get revenge and kill Chapel himself because Chapel beat him to the punch. And this is another point where Bootsy tries to intervene and states, hey man, you know, you don't want to be like these people. You need to be better. And that's what Bobby would have wanted. And Spawn once again thanks Bootsy for his kind words and states that, you know, as much as he wants to be a better person, he needs to start acting like the person he wants to be instead of just saying it. And he states that he's been given a lot of power and it's time he tries to use it. One of the men then asks, but doesn't your magic hurt you when you use it? And Spawn states, what hurts me is seeing my friends get murdered. The men ask then if he's going to do some sort of miraculous healing and bring Bobby back to life. And Spawn states, you know, I'm not a god and you guys shouldn't really see me that way. You know, I'm just a man who's been given a lot of power and is trying to figure out what he should do with it. And, you know, he's going to have to ask Bobby to do something for him. And Bootsy asks, what's that? And we find out on the next page that what Spawn wants Bobby to do is live, as he blasts him with a huge jolt of energy, which lifts his body off the ground and into midair. Suddenly then, Bobby looks up and says, wow, what a trip. Hey, Bootsy, did you miss me? Be honest. Meaning, he absolutely realizes that he was just dead. The men are somewhat flabbergasted, but then they see that Spawn is on his knees and they ask, hey, Al, are you okay? And he states no. And this is because it took a huge portion of his energy to do that. From what his power level was shown to be in issue number 26, it apparently took 162 points of his power to resurrect someone. And that's a pretty solid little chunk for one action. And we see that Spawn is just barely above 7,000 at this point when he started at 9,999, inching him closer to a second death and being brought back into hell in service of the Mabalja. Meanwhile, in Queens, we are brought into the home of Terry Fitzgerald and his wife, Wanda. Wanda is on the phone asking him if he's been able to make any headway about trying to find out who at the CIA had it in for him and was trying to have him killed. He states that he's able to get his hands on some files, but he's not really capable of going through them at work, and he's not certain what all of them mean just yet, and that he's going to bring them home so that the two of them can go through them together. This, of course, playing into the fact that Wanda now wants to be more active in Terry's professional life and also wants to get to the bottom of exactly what the heck was going on and why so many people were trying to kill him. He states that he'll be home soon, and she tells him that she's going to get their baby, Cyan, down for a nap, and that she looks forward to seeing him so that they can really start combing through these files and figure out exactly what the hell happened. Meanwhile, back in the alleyways, we hear someone state, "There he is, sire," as a laser blast explodes through Spawn's chest, catching him completely off guard. And due to his weakened state after just having brought Bobby back from the dead, he and his costume were completely ill-prepared to try and protect him from the attack. This attack, of course, comes from the character that we met at the beginning of the book, who is now referring to himself as the Curse. He applauds the homeless men who led him to Spawn, and these men don't care too much for Spawn at this point, with pretty good reason, as he's lately been treating the men of the alleyways like garbage, and they apparently have had enough, as they've led a man directly to him to, in their minds, kill him. Curse then states that he's appreciative of the men and tells them that when he receives the power, they will not be shunned as he has been, so promises the Curse. And this, of course, brings us back to what I stated earlier. You know, for the zealotry that Curse seems to have, again, he's obsessed with receiving some sort of divine power. And then, for as much as he talked in the beginning of the book about how he trusts in God's plan, he then, of course, states, I'm not going to do to you what he did to me, meaning that he doesn't really trust in God's plan at all, as he believes he knows better and is going to do things exactly the opposite way when he receives the divine blessing that he's apparently supposed to receive from God for his actions. And it's completely convoluted and the logic makes no sense. And, it's kind of starting to show that Curse may not be all there mentally either, and perhaps he's more than just a zealot. He may also have some pretty deep mental health issues. We, of course, see Spawn laid out on the ground, down for the count, essentially. He's just been the victim of a massive sneak attack, and this, accompanied with the weakened state he was in after resurrecting his friend, means that he's not in good shape and things are looking pretty bad. Believing that he's won the day, Curse begins to try and analyze the situation, as he states that if this man had more faith and was a true believer, he would not have fallen to mere human technology so quickly. He then states that perhaps this man was not blessed with powers from heaven and instead was given powers by the world of hell and is nothing more than an agent of Satan, but then walks away with the other men stating that, it's no matter, he'll rot in hell, believing that he's won. And we then see that Bobby and Bootsy and the other two men who were with Spawn previously are flabbergasted by what happened, as they try and figure out what to do, as they believe that maybe Spawn's dead. However, they then see that his cape is kind of moving on its own, and they realize that maybe he'll be okay, and they try to get him to a place where they can tend to his wounds. However, they're incapable of moving his body, given that Spawn weighs almost 500 pounds, due to the fact that he's made up almost entirely of psychoplasm, which is incredibly dense. As they try to figure out how they're going to move him, the silence of the alleyway is then broken by a police siren, and the men realize that they're gonna have a lot of other problems to deal with if they don't act quickly. And once again, this is kind of showing the kind of logical fallacies that Curse is dealing with in his own mind. He wants to be bestowed with divine powers, and he thought that Spawn had. So what he decided to do was go murder him as a way to prove to God that he gave powers to the wrong person and that they should have been given to him, which is ridiculous. It doesn't even make sense. If this man is such a devout believer, then he would have never been able to, just go ahead and justify murdering someone else by being like, oh yeah, this guy got something that I should have, so I'm going to kill him over it. I mean, it's literally just jealousy 101. And it's crazy that he considers himself to be this devout follower of God, and meanwhile, he's just literally breaking multiple 10 commandments all at once so that he can gain something that he believes he's owed. Back in the home of Terry and Wanda, we see the two of them with their daughter sitting around the kitchen table, having just finished some dinner. And Wanda asks if Terry was able to learn any more things while he was at work about what was happening, and he states that he couldn't make a whole lot of headway, and he is concerned because of why so many other people were involved. It's one thing for the CIA to be involved, but he's not sure what the mafia's connection was or the police, and he's kind of really struggling to figure out how to put all of these pieces together. And then he also doesn't understand how or why Spawn fits into this puzzle, because, you know, he doesn't realize, of course, that Spawn was Al Simmons, his former best friend, and he's trying to figure out why Spawn would help him and how Spawn knew his name. Back in the alleyway, we see a police car speeding down the alley, and Bootsy, thinking quick on his feet, yells at one of the other homeless men, "You know what to do, act quickly." However, as we see that man right here getting ready to go off into the darkness, the next panel shows him hunched around Spawn's lifeless body with the other three, which is a bit of a continuity error. As the police officer approaches, he says that there were reports of a loud gun blast in the area and wants to know if these men heard anything. They all say no, but then he asks, "Hey, what's up with your friend there on the ground?" Bootsy quickly says that, you know, their buddy Al is just a lightweight and can't handle his liquor. He's a hopeless drunk, and they're just trying to get him, taken care of while he's passed out. The officer says that they need to move him because he has to get through the alley. And then Bootsy's like, "Oh, sure, right away," when suddenly there's a loud scream from another direction. The officer looks back and says, "Holy crap, where did that come from?" And Bootsy says, "Hey, you may want to go check it out," with a smirk on his face, as the officer jumps back into his cruiser and throws it in reverse and goes back where he came from. We then see that Bootsy says, "Boy, you know, it is a good thing that our old pal over there can scream like a girl." And that was, of course, the whole plan from the first place. It was to distract the officer and make him believe that someone was being attacked in another part of the alleyway. The men, realizing then that they've bought themselves some time, also know that they can't get Spawn out of the alley by themselves, so Bootsy says he's going to go get help from a few other guys. In another part of the alley, Curse, believing he's won, has decided to start preaching to all the other men in the alleyway and deliver them a sermon, where he states, you know, this entire alleyway is surrounded by sinners because they lack faith and they don't have a belief in God. And then he begins to tell them a story of his youth, stating that when he was a child, he spent most of his time praying and trying to get God to bring peace upon him. And he believed that his prayers weren't answered, so he decided that the only way to get God to listen was to start mutilating himself. So he plucked out his own eye and gave himself a deep scar on his face, and then went so far as to cut off his right arm. And when he was brought to the doctors, they stated that, you know, he had deep mental illness and that, you know, self-mutilation was not normal and that he was trying to get attention. And Curse then states, you know, they didn't understand that what I was looking for was truth and that it would only be found through faith. And that through his blind faith, not logic, is how he would achieve his goals. But he realized that he needed to pretend to be somebody that he wasn't to fool the doctors. So he decided to live the way that they wanted. So he went to college and started businesses and became very wealthy in the process. And this was all a front, though, because he never stopped his quest for being, you know, given the divine power that he wanted. Once again, stating that his motivation is entirely rooted in self-interest. You know, he doesn't want to help people. He doesn't want to be a good person. He literally just wants to be given divine power from God, and he'll try and do whatever it takes to achieve this, even if it means killing people. However, before he can continue his sermon, he's interrupted when a blast comes out of nowhere and shatters his elbow on his cybernetic arm, blowing the large laser cannon right off and destroying it. We then see that Spawn has regained consciousness and also grabbed some heavy-duty hardware to take on Curse, still bleeding out of his chest as there's a giant hole still right in the middle of it. He then tells Curse, piece of advice, the next time you kill someone, make sure they're dead before you walk away, otherwise you're just going to get chased by Ghost. Curse collapses on the ground, stating, "How dare you, you've destroyed my arm." But then Spawn tells him to shut up, as he's tired of these weird sick pigs using twisted logic to convince themselves that they've got, some sort of permission from up high to go around shooting people. And then he says, "Screw you and whoever sent you." Now, Curse, of course, in his delusional state, believes that he is on a divine mission from God, or at least he's convinced himself of that, and calls Spawn a blasphemer as, again, Al thought someone had sent Curse to come after him, when in reality, Curse did this of his complete own volition. And he states then that he's not going to submit to the devil's child, and that he's going to take him on and accept his burden of having to rid the world of this evil creature. Spawn says, "Good, I'm not even going to use my guns, because kicking your ass with my fist is going to feel way better." Spawn then drops his guns and states, "Whoever sent you's got to be one sick puppy." However, this enrages Curse, as he believes that once again Spawn is intentionally being blasphemous, even though Curse has received no orders from God whatsoever and is living in a state of perpetual delusion. He leaps forward and kicks Spawn square in the chin with his giant asymmetrical boot, and then gets on top of him and starts beating him silly, using some sort of illogical double blade thing to cut him on the chin, and then kicking him while he's down, and then standing in front of the crowd of homeless men who are cheering for him, stating that, "I'm not going to be defeated by the minions of hell," and claiming that he's victorious, believing once again that he's defeated Spawn, and not adhering to Spawn's advice of checking to make sure that he actually finished the job. And despite the fact that Curse is portrayed as an older man, probably in his mid to late 50s, possibly even early 60s, he can actually move pretty quick, and is rather capable in a fight, as, he wasn't facing too much opposition and kind of caught Spawn off guard. Granted, Spawn is still in somewhat of a weakened state, but, he got a few licks in there pretty good and was actually able to kind of match up with Spawn here at the beginning of this fight. However, once again, Curse's hubris is his undoing, as Spawn leaps forward from behind and kicks him square in the back, then grabs him and throws him down, punches him, and continues his assault until Curse is overwhelmed. And it's at this point that his followers all gather around and tell Spawn to stop, that if he's going to try and kill Curse, that he's going to have to go through them first to do it. Meanwhile, back in the home of Terry and Wanda, Cyan is fast asleep as the two of them continue to comb through all the files that Terry brought home with him. And they're still having trouble trying to piece together how any of it makes sense, or what led to the events of Terry being almost killed. And they believe that it all kind of started back with the weapons that were stolen from a depot. Of course, this happened in issue number 6, when Spawn broke into the weapons depot to steal as much as he could to go and fight Overkill. If you'd like to check that out, you can go back and check my video on, and watch my video on Spawn number 6. But after that, everything seems to be kind of fishy and not make a whole lot of sense. At this point, Terry actually thanks Wanda for helping him so much and states that, he did try and shield her from all of this, given what happened with Al and her mourning over the loss of her previous husband. And she thanks him for that, but states that she's all in now on trying to help him. As he leaves to go put their daughter to bed, Wanda continues to comb through the files and realizes that she's really having a hard time on trying to figure out how all of this pieces together, as it doesn't seem like a lot of it makes sense. But she's decided that she's going to start by trying to focus on figuring out how Spawn knows who Terry is and who Spawn is. And this is where things start to take a little bit of a turn in the idea of Spawn remaining anonymous, and Wanda potentially figuring out exactly what's going on in all of this, and maybe finding out the truth that Spawn is her late husband, Al Simmons. Meanwhile, back in the alleyways, we see that Spawn has called the bluff of the homeless men and decided to just lunge directly through them, sending them all flying through the air to get his hands on Curse. At this point, he's completely overwhelmed with rage and is more concerned about getting rid of this man who attacked him than he is about the safety of the men in the alleyways, which is a little bit counteractive or counterintuitive to what he said at the beginning of this comic, where he wanted to try and take a more active role as in protecting them. But again, this kind of just falls back to, Spawn, despite having all this power, is still, mentally a man and deals with the same emotional struggles that any other man would deal with as we come to the end question mark of this issue. We then get into image info. Again, we've seen this a bunch at this point. It's literally just a rundown of stuff that's going to be happening in the future of 1995. And, there's nothing really to talk about here other than here's a list of stuff that was going to be going on in the ensuing months. We then reach the spawning ground, which is, of course, the letter section where fans can write in. A few critical letters in this one, one of which was criticizing heavily the Image X month, where a bunch of different Image creative teams swapped titles that they were working on. We, of course, saw this with Spawn number 25, where Mark Silvestri and his team came over to work on that book, and Todd went over to work on Cyberforce. Now, some of it was not well received. However, in my opinion, Spawn number 25 looks amazing. The pencils are great, the inks are great, and the color is mind-boggling. And to this reader's credit, the guy who's criticizing all this, he did bring up the job that Brian Haberlin did on Spawn number 25, the colorist who worked on that, and told Todd that he thought it was an absolutely mind-blowing job. And Todd agreed, and I agree as well. It looks so good. If you haven't watched my video on Spawn number 25, I suggest you do so, just so you can see how good the colors in that book look. But Todd does admit that Image X month could have been handled better, as some of the people that were crossing over kind of didn't make sense. Todd works on a single hero book, and he moved over to a team book. Jim Valentino did the same thing, and in a lot of ways, it felt like it didn't really mesh well. And Todd also stated that they really could have spent more time planning it out better than they did. And if they ever did it again, they would actually plan it way in advance to make sure that it all worked. To my recollection, I don't know that they ever did do it again. But, it's one of those things where you try something out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I do applaud them for at least, trying something a little bit different. And the other critical letter that's in this book is talking about how a lot of readers are a little upset about Todd bringing Greg Capullo on to work on Spawn. And at this point, Todd is still working on the issues with Greg. This would change in the future. But it is kind of weird to look at it now and see how critical some people were of that, despite the fact that I find Greg's artwork to be fantastic. And, of course, we now know in the future that Greg would be a cornerstone of Spawn for years, all the way up until issue 100. So, and even then, despite the fact that he's not like the primary artist anymore, he still comes back and does some work for Todd every now and again, sometimes with some covers. I think once in a while he'll do like an issue here or there. He's never full-time on it anymore, but he still works on it from time to time, and I'm always happy when he does. But it is kind of weird to look back at this point, or look back from this point now, and see that, there was a lot of people who weren't too happy about it back then, despite the fact that Greg was really instrumental in pretty significant changes, and also, like, reestablishing a new look for the character as a whole that we're going to see in the near future with these videos. It's wild to look back and realize that, it's all roses here in the future, but at the time, there was a lot of grumbling that was going on about it. We then get a couple of pinups. This one here on the left is by John Clary. It's, of course, got Spawn sitting on top of a gravestone with some bats flying overhead. It looks pretty cool. But this one over here by John Raskin, I really like a lot. Of course, we see Spawn here in evidently the pits of hell fighting off some demons who are trying to get him. I really like this one. The subject matter is super cool. I really like the way he did the lighting effects here, where, Spawn's hand giving off the energy of his powers is the light source. And the background looks super cool. It really gives this feel of Spawn being in like a cramped type of underworld environment. Also, the shadowing and shading is really cool. This is just an overall awesome pinup, and I really like it. We then get to 2 pages of image fan art. However, in this issue, every one of the fan art pictures is of Angela, and this is for cross-promotion for the Angela miniseries, which was in production, in publication at this time. I've already done a full video series on all 3 issues of the Angela miniseries, and if you're interested in those, you can watch them in my Spawn miniseries playlist. We then get an advertisement for the Angela action figure. This, of course, is the first action figure of Angela from Todd Toys, still Todd Toys at this point. And we then see a special mail-away offer for a red Violator Bendy figure. This, of course, was to celebrate that apparently Violator #1 was the best-selling comic book of all of 1994. And this was a free offer. You just had to send this mail-away form in and get it by May 1st, 1995. Crap, we just missed it. But I can say, I don't know that a lot of people did this because as someone who, collects Spawn comics pretty aggressively and also the toys to a lesser extent, I'm always on the lookout for, different Spawn memorabilia and toys and books. I have never once in my entire life seen one of these red Violator Bendy figures, ever. So, I mean, it's possible that a lot of them got mailed out and people just all still have them, but what seems more likely is that very few people did this, and there are very, very few of these figures floating around out there. We then see an advertisement for the Spawn trading card series from Wildstorm Productions. I have these cards. And honestly, I don't like them. I hate to say it, but I found them to be very lackluster. The artwork on many of the cards is kind of subpar in my opinion. And also, the cards are like this shape. They're weird, long, rectangular cards, which gives you more room for artwork, sure. But it also means that there's literally no card sleeves that these will fit into. So if you want to preserve them in card sleeves, you can't, because they don't exist for this. This is something that I feel like Todd should have thought of before he okayed these to be put into production, but apparently he didn't, and now we're all stuck with a bunch of weird shaped cards that have, at their best, average artwork that we can't even protect if we wanted to. And on the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for the Angela miniseries, obviously issue number 3. Once again, I have videos of all 3 of the issues of the Angela miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist if you'd like to check them out. And that was Spawn number 27. And overall, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I'm not going to lie, I really like the Curse, despite the fact that he is by no means one of Spawn's A-list villains. He's kind of on the weaker side, and, he doesn't really have any special powers. He relies on, like, cybernetic technology. But I've always thought that his character and costume design was really cool. I like the look of his armor. I love the solid faceplate design of his helmet, where, there's no eye holes or anything. The green and black color palette looks super cool. I just really thought he had a great look, despite the fact that he's really on the weaker side in terms of villains that Spawn faces off against overall. And I also feel like there's a lot of, subtle depth to the character. As I stated, if you're not paying attention, Curse kind of comes across as just this de facto weird religious zealot who's just going after Spawn based on, trying to perpetuate some sort of like godly narrative type of thing. But the further you look into it, the more you realize that, he's really just a guy who's kind of obsessive compulsive and crazy to some extent, and is literally just, justifying his actions by stating that, they're all godly in nature, when in reality, this is just a delusion that he lives within. And it's funny that, Spawn notices this right away. Remember, when he was alive as Al Simmons, Al was an atheist, and then, of course, died, went to hell, and came back and realized that, oh, wait a minute, I was wrong in not believing in any of that stuff. But because of his experience with Wanda's grandmother, who was also a very devout Christian, but not a terrible person, and is just someone who did her best to try and help others around her, and was a loving woman, and, you know, really tried to, you know, convey the quote-unquote love of God with her actions, he understands that, you know, she and her motives were all pure, whereas Curse is just some crazy guy who's, you know, trying to basically not have to accept any responsibility for his actions by just stating that, oh, God told me to do all this stuff, so it's fine. Kind of the same thing as like the whole devil made me do it defense that criminals use very frequently. And I thought that was an interesting way to write this story. Of course, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might think Curse is awful, which is a lot of people, and that this story wasn't that well written, and if so, that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.